The loader's engine rumbled to life at 6 in the morning, and I had barely backed it off the flatbed when a woman in pressed khakis and a visor marched across the street like she owned the entire neighborhood. I had owned this Caterpillar 926M loader for 3 years, and it was my pride and joy beyond my actual job as Town Supervisor of Millbrook, New York. Most people didn't know about my position because I kept a low profile, preferring to spend my weekends doing landscaping work for extra cash and honestly, just for the love of operating heavy machinery. There was something therapeutic about moving earth and clearing land that no amount of paperwork could match. The woman stopped right in front of my loader, hands on her hips, her face already red with what I assumed was pre-loaded anger. I killed the engine and climbed down from the cab. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm Candace Edmonds, president of the Hollow Creek Homeowners Association, and I need to speak with you immediately." I wiped my hands on my jeans and nodded. "Quincy Xavier, what can I do for you?" "You can start by explaining why you're operating heavy machinery at this ungodly hour," she said, gesturing dramatically at her watch. "Our HOA quiet hours extend until 8 a.m. on weekends." I glanced at my own watch. It was 6:15. I'm on my own property, and according to town ordinance, construction and landscaping work can begin at 6 a.m. any day of the week. Her eyes narrowed. "Town ordinance doesn't supersede HOA regulations, Mr. Xavier. I suggest you familiarize yourself with our bylaws before you continue." I had read those bylaws. In fact, I had reviewed them professionally 3 months ago when the HOA had submitted a request to the town for stricter parking enforcement. "I'm familiar with them, Mrs. Edmonds. The HOA can't restrict activities on private property that are within town code." "We'll see about that," she snapped. "But that's not why I'm here. Since you clearly have this machinery available and operational, you can clear the fallen trees on my property. The storm last week knocked down 3 large oaks and they're blocking my back garden." I blinked at her, unsure if I had heard correctly. "You want me to clear your property?" "Yes, immediately. As HOA president, I'm requisitioning your equipment for community purposes. It's in Section 12 of the bylaws." Section 12 allowed the HOA to request volunteer labor for common areas, not private property, and certainly not to requisition private equipment. I opened my mouth to explain this, but she cut me off. "I expect you to start within the hour. My property is the large colonial at 445 Meadowbrook Lane. You can't miss it." She turned on her heel and marched back across the street. I stood there for a moment, genuinely stunned. I had dealt with difficult people in my role as town supervisor, but this was a new level of entitlement. I pulled out my phone and called my friend Derek, who lived 2 streets over. "You're not going to believe what just happened," I said when he answered. Derek laughed after I explained. "That's Candace for you. She tried to fine me $200 last month because my garbage can was visible from the street on a non-collection day. Never mind that the collection company came a day late. Does she know I'm the town supervisor? Doubt it. You keep that pretty quiet, and she only moved here about 8 months ago. She's made enemies with half the neighborhood already." After we hung up, I went back to my original plan, which was clearing the drainage ditch along my back property line. The spring thaw had caused significant erosion, and I needed to reshape the grade before the heavy rains came. I worked for about 2 hours, enjoying the smooth hydraulics of the loader as it scooped and dumped soil exactly where I needed it. Around 8:30, a red BMW pulled into my driveway. Candace climbed out, her face even redder than before. "Mr. Xavier, I've been waiting for over 2 hours. This is completely unacceptable." I shut down the loader and climbed down again. "Mrs. Edmonds, I'm not clearing your property. I have my own work to do." "This is a direct violation of HOA cooperation standards," she said, pulling out her phone and tapping at it furiously. "I'm documenting this refusal. You'll be receiving a formal violation notice by Monday. I'm not refusing to cooperate with the HOA. I'm declining a personal request that's not covered by any HOA regulation. I told you, Section 12 clearly states, Section 12 applies to common areas," I said calmly. "Your private property isn't a common area, and even if it was, the HOA can't requisition private equipment." She jabbed her finger at me. "I could make life very difficult for you, Mr. Xavier. I've noticed several potential violations on your property, that commercial vehicle, for instance." She pointed at my truck, which had my landscaping business logo on the door. "Commercial vehicles aren't permitted in residential driveways overnight. That's a pickup truck with a magnetic sign. It's registered as a personal vehicle." "We'll let the HOA board decide that," she said. "Meeting is Tuesday night at 7. I suggest you attend and bring a better attitude." She drove off, leaving me shaking my head. I had Tuesday night blocked off anyway since the town board meeting was Wednesday, and I always reviewed the agenda the night before. But this situation was getting out of hand. Monday morning, I drove to town hall for my regular office hours. My assistant, Patricia, handed me a stack of messages as soon as I walked in. "Busy weekend?" she asked. "You have no idea." I flipped through the messages. Routine stuff mostly, but one caught my eye. A formal complaint from the Hollow Creek HOA about noise violations in the neighborhood. I read through it. Candace had filed a complaint against me personally, claiming I regularly operated heavy machinery at inappropriate hours and refused to assist with community needs. "Patricia, can you pull the file on Hollow Creek HOA? I want to review their incorporation documents and any previous complaints." She returned 20 minutes later with a thick folder. "They've been busy," she said. 14 complaints to the town in the past 8 months, everything from parking violations to fence height disputes. I spent the next hour reading through the file. Candace had become HOA president in October after moving to Millbrook from Westchester County. In that short time, she had increased the HOA's annual fees by 30%, implemented 17 new regulations, and issued over 100 violation notices to homeowners. 3 separate residents had filed counter-complaints with the town, claiming harassment. What interested me most was a letter from the previous HOA president, a man named George Thornton, who had resigned rather than work with Candace. His resignation letter was diplomatic, but reading between the lines, it was clear she had made his life miserable. I made a note to call George and then turned to the current complaint. It was completely without merit. Town ordinances were clear about when machinery could be operated, and I was well within my rights. I drafted a formal response and had Patricia send it to Candace's attention. Tuesday evening, I showed up at the Hollow Creek Community Center at 6:55. About 30 residents were already there, sitting in folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table at the front. Candace sat at the center of the table, flanked by 4 other board members who all looked distinctly uncomfortable. I recognized several neighbors and gave them a wave before taking a seat in the back row. Candace noticed me, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Let's begin," she said sharply at 7 on the dot. "First order of business, approval of last month's minutes. All in favor?" The meeting proceeded through routine matters, landscaping contracts for common areas, pool opening schedule, and a discussion about repainting the community center. Then Candace cleared her throat. "Item 7, enforcement actions. We have several violations to address." She pulled out a printed list. First, 892 Hickory Drive, commercial vehicle parked in residential driveway. That was my address. I raised my hand. Yes, Candace said, her tone icy. I'd like to address that. The vehicle in question is a personal pickup truck with a removable business sign. It meets all town codes for residential parking. This is an HOA matter, not a town matter, she said. The bylaws clearly state no commercial vehicles. An older gentleman in the front row raised his hand. Point of order. The bylaws define commercial vehicles as those requiring a commercial license plate or CDL to operate. A standard pickup doesn't qualify. Candace shot him a look that could melt steel. Thank you, Bernard, but I'll interpret the bylaws. Actually, Bernard said, standing up, that's not how it works. The bylaws are a legal document with specific definitions. You can't just reinterpret them to suit your purposes. Several other residents murmured agreement. Candace's face flushed. The board will take this matter under advisement, she said curtly. Next item, refusal to provide community assistance. Mr. Xavier refused to use his equipment to clear storm damage. I stood up this time. That was storm damage on your private property, Mrs. Edmonds. Not a common area. You asked me to do private work for free. It was a community service request, she insisted. It was your backyard, I said flatly. That's not a community service. A woman sitting 2 rows ahead of me turned around. Wait, Candace, did you try to make him work on your property for free? It was a reasonable request given the circumstances, Candace said. It was ridiculous, someone else called out. You can't just commandeer people's equipment. The meeting devolved into chaos as multiple residents started talking at once, many of them clearly fed up with Candace's overreach. She banged a gavel on the table, trying to restore order, but it took several minutes before people quieted down. This meeting is out of order, she declared. We'll resume when everyone can behave professionally. Maybe you should start, Bernard said quietly but loud enough for everyone to hear. Several people laughed. Candace stood up abruptly. I don't have to tolerate this disrespect. Meeting adjourned. She gathered her papers and stormed out, leaving the other board members sitting there looking bewildered. One of them, a woman in her 50s, turned to the audience. I apologize for that. For what it's worth, I don't think there are any legitimate violations against Mr. Xavier. We'll review the matters raised and send out a formal decision. People started filtering out, and several neighbors came up to talk to me. Sorry you got caught in Candace's crosshairs, one man said. She's been a nightmare since she took over. Has anyone considered recalling her? I asked. Bernard, the older gentleman who had challenged Candace, shook his head. We looked into it. The bylaws require a petition signed by 60% of homeowners and then a special election. It's a high bar. But not impossible, I said. No, not impossible, just difficult. He studied me for a moment. You're the town supervisor, aren't you? I thought you looked familiar. I saw you at the Veterans Memorial dedication last fall. So much for keeping a low profile. I am, but I'd appreciate it if that didn't become common knowledge. I like keeping my professional and personal life separate when I can. Your secret's safe with me, Bernard said. But between you and me, we could use someone with legal knowledge to help navigate this situation. Candace is going to destroy this neighborhood if someone doesn't stop her. We exchanged contact information, and I drove home thinking about the problem. As town supervisor, I had to be careful about getting too involved in HOA politics. But as a resident and homeowner, I had every right to protect my interests and those of my neighbors. Wednesday morning, I met with the town attorney, Richard Morrison, to discuss the situation. Technically, you're in the clear, Richard said after I explained everything. The HOA can't enforce regulations that conflict with town ordinances, and they certainly can't requisition private property. But you need to be careful. If she realizes you're the town supervisor, she might accuse you of using your position to intimidate her. I haven't mentioned my position to her at all, I said. I've been handling this strictly as a private citizen. Good. Keep it that way unless it becomes absolutely necessary. Richard leaned back in his chair. What concerns me more is this pattern of harassment. You said there have been multiple complaints from residents, 14 formal complaints to the town in 8 months. Plus the informal ones I've been hearing about. That's worth investigating. An HOA that becomes too aggressive can create legal liability for the town if we don't address it. Let me look into their incorporation status and make sure everything's legitimate. Over the next few days, I focused on my regular duties as town supervisor. We had a zoning variance hearing for a new commercial development, budget discussions for the upcoming fiscal year, and the usual stream of resident concerns. But I couldn't stop thinking about the HOA situation. Friday afternoon, Richard called me into his office. Found something interesting, he said, spreading several documents across his desk. The Hollow Creek HOA's current bylaws were amended in October without proper notice to homeowners. What kind of amendments? Significant ones. The previous bylaws required a 30-day notice period before any board meeting where bylaw amendments would be voted on. The new bylaws reduced that to 7 days. The fee increase from $150 to $200 annually was passed under those new rules. So the amendments themselves might be invalid, I asked. Possibly. More concerning is that several of the new regulations appear to violate New York State property law. HOAs can't restrict activities that are explicitly allowed under state or local ordinances. Yet these new bylaws attempt to do exactly that. I thought about this. If the bylaws are invalid, then all enforcement actions under them are also invalid. Correct, which means all those violation notices Candace has been issuing, potentially unenforceable. Richard tapped the documents. As town attorney, I'm obligated to inform the HOA board about these issues. They could face legal liability if homeowners decide to sue. Candace isn't going to take that well, I said. No, but it's not her decision to make. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to all homeowners. I'll draft a letter this afternoon. That evening, I was working in my garage when a police car pulled into my driveway. Officer Mike Stevens, someone I knew from various town functions, got out and walked over. "Evening, Quincy," he said. "Got a strange call I wanted to talk to you about." "Let me guess. Candace Edmonds," Mike grinned. "How'd you know?" "She called the station claiming you threatened her at an HOA meeting." "I was at the meeting, but I definitely didn't threaten anyone. There were 30 witnesses. That's what I figured." But she was pretty insistent, so I told her I'd follow up. Consider this the follow-up. He pulled out a notepad. "Want to tell me what actually happened?" I walked him through the entire situation, from Saturday morning's loader incident to Tuesday's contentious meeting. Mike took notes and shook his head several times. "She's something else," he said when I finished. "We've had 3 calls from her in the past month. Noise complaints, parking complaints, one claimed that a neighbor's dog was threatening her. All of them turned out to be nothing." "Is there anything you can do?" I asked. "Not really, as long as she's not filing false reports that require significant resources. These have all been minor calls that we can handle with a quick visit. But if it escalates, that's different." He closed his notepad. "Off the record. Document everything. Save emails, take photos, keep records of every interaction. People like this often escalate until they cross a legal line." Saturday morning, I was loading mulch into my truck bed when Candace's BMW pulled up. She didn't get out immediately, just sat there watching me. After a few minutes, she finally emerged. "Mr. Xavier, we need to talk." I set down my shovel and turned to face her. "What about?" "I received a very disturbing letter from the town attorney yesterday." She held up a document. "He claims there are issues with our bylaws." "I wouldn't know anything about that," I said truthfully. Richard hadn't told me he was sending the letter so soon. "Don't play dumb. This has your fingerprints all over it. You filed a complaint with the town, didn't you?" "Actually, I didn't. But there have been multiple complaints from various residents. Maybe that's what prompted the review." Her eyes narrowed. "Who are you really? You're not just some landscaper with a loader." "I'm a resident and homeowner, same as you." "No, there's something else. The town attorney doesn't just randomly review HOA bylaws. Someone with influence pushed this." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "I'm going to find out who you are and what your game is." "No game, Mrs. Edmonds. Just a guy who wants to work on his property in peace." She stared at me for a long moment, then got back in her car and drove off. I had a sinking feeling that things were about to get worse before they got better. Monday morning, I arrived at Town Hall to find Patricia looking stressed. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Candace Edmonds filed a formal complaint against you, claiming conflict of interest and abuse of power." I read through the complaint. It was 5 pages of accusations, claiming that I had used my position as town supervisor to target the HOA unfairly, that I had directed the town attorney to investigate them without cause, and that I was retaliating against her personally for enforcing HOA rules. "She figured out who I am," I said. "Apparently. She's demanding you recuse yourself from any town matters involving the HOA and wants the County Board of Ethics to investigate you." I sat down at my desk and thought through my options. The accusations were baseless, but they could still cause headaches. I had been scrupulously careful not to use my position inappropriately, but perception mattered in politics. "Set up a meeting with Richard," I said, "and contact the County Ethics Board. I want to be proactive about this." By Wednesday, I had provided the County Ethics Board with a complete timeline of events, documentation of every interaction, and statements from witnesses. The board's director, a no-nonsense woman named Susan Palmer, reviewed everything and rendered her decision within 48 hours. "There's no conflict of interest," Susan told me over the phone. "You responded to the HOA matter as a private citizen initially. The town attorney's review was prompted by multiple resident complaints and his own obligation to ensure HOAs operating within town limits comply with state law. You didn't direct him to do anything. In fact, you were careful not to involve your official position at all." "What about Candace's complaint?" I asked. "It's without merit. I'll be sending her a formal response explaining that." "I'll also note that filing frivolous ethics complaints can itself be considered a violation of the Ethics Code." Susan paused. "Between you and me, Mr. Xavier, this woman sounds like a problem. She's certainly persistent. Persistent is one word for it. Watch your back. People who file complaints like this often escalate when they don't get their way." The following Tuesday, there was another HOA meeting. I debated whether to attend but decided I needed to stay informed. When I arrived, the parking lot was packed, far more than the previous meeting. Apparently, word had spread about the bylaw issues. Candace sat at the front table again, but this time she looked prepared for battle. She had a stack of documents and a laptop set up in front of her. The other board members looked even more uncomfortable than before. "This meeting will come to order," she announced. "First item, addressing false allegations about our bylaws." Bernard raised his hand immediately. "Point of order. The town attorney's letter isn't an allegation. It's a legal opinion based on his review of our incorporation documents. It's an opinion I strongly disagree with, Candace said. The town has no jurisdiction over HOA internal matters. Actually, a new voice said from the back, they do when the HOA violates state law. Everyone turned. A man in his 60s wearing a suit stood up. I recognized him as George Thornton, the previous HOA president. The town has an obligation to ensure all organizations operating within its borders comply with applicable law, George continued. That includes HOAs. The attorney's letter outlined specific violations of the New York not-for-profit corporation law. Those aren't opinions, Candace. Those are legal facts. You have no standing to speak here, Candace snapped. You resigned. I'm still a homeowner and resident. I have every right to attend and speak at HOA meetings. George walked to the front of the room. I've reviewed the letter and the amended bylaws. The attorney is correct. The amendments were passed without proper notice. Several of them conflict with state property law, and the fee increase may be invalid. Murmurs spread through the crowd. One of the other board members, a younger man I didn't recognize, spoke up. I wasn't aware of these issues, he said. Candace, you told us the amendments were standard updates. They are standard, she insisted. George is working with outside agitators to undermine this board. Outside agitators, George said. Candace, I've lived here for 22 years. I was HOA president for 6. I know these bylaws inside and out, and what you've done is illegal. The meeting erupted into chaos. Multiple people were shouting questions, demanding explanations, some defending Candace and others calling for her resignation. I sat quietly, watching it all unfold. Finally, Bernard stood up and spoke in a commanding voice. Enough. This accomplishes nothing. We need a special meeting with all homeowners to address these issues properly. The board should suspend all enforcement actions until we resolve the bylaw questions. One of the other board members, the woman who had apologized at the previous meeting, nodded. I agree. We can't enforce rules that might not be valid, and we need legal counsel beyond just Candace's interpretation. I'm the president of this board, Candace said, her voice shaking with anger. We don't need a special meeting. We need residents to follow the rules. Then let's vote on it, Bernard said. I move that the board suspend all enforcement actions pending a legal review of the bylaws and that we schedule a special meeting within 30 days. I second, someone called out. Candace glared at her fellow board members. We need a board vote, not a resident vote. The 4 other board members looked at each other. One by one, they raised their hands in favor of Bernard's motion. Candace's face turned an alarming shade of red. This is a coup, she said. You're all in on this conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy, the younger board member said. It's due diligence. If we've made legal errors, we need to fix them. Candace gathered her materials and stood up. Fine. I don't need this aggravation. I resign, effective immediately. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone in the back started clapping and others joined in. Candace stormed out of the community center, leaving her laptop behind. After the meeting, George approached me. You're Quincy Xavier, right? I wanted to thank you. For what? I didn't do anything. You stood up to her when she tried to bully you, and you didn't back down. That encouraged others to speak up too. She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for months, and everyone was too afraid to push back. What happens now? I asked. The board will probably appoint an interim president, hire a lawyer to review everything, and figure out what mess we're in. George sighed. It's going to take months to sort out, but at least she's gone. I drove home feeling relieved but also wary. People like Candace didn't usually give up that easily. I was right to be concerned. Thursday afternoon, I got a call from Patricia. "Candace Edmonds is here at Town Hall demanding to see you," she said. "She's causing quite a scene. I'll be right there." When I arrived, Candace was standing in the lobby, her voice echoing off the walls as she berated Patricia. "He can't hide behind his secretary forever. I demand to speak with the town supervisor." "That would be me," I said, walking up behind her. She spun around and her eyes went wide. "You're the town supervisor." "I am. And I've been trying to tell you for 2 weeks that you can't requisition private property or enforce rules that violate town ordinances." Her mouth opened and closed several times. Then her expression hardened. "This is a massive conflict of interest. You've been targeting me personally." "I've done no such thing. I responded to your demands as a private citizen. The town attorney's review was based on multiple resident complaints and his professional obligations. I never used my position to target you. I don't believe that for a second. You orchestrated this entire thing to undermine me. Mrs. Edmonds, I think you should leave before this conversation goes somewhere neither of us wants it to go." "I'm not going anywhere. I'm filing a lawsuit against you personally and the town. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd just cleared those trees." Richard Morrison appeared from his office. "Mrs. Edmonds, making threats of litigation in the town hall lobby isn't productive. If you want to discuss these matters formally, you're welcome to put your concerns in writing." "Oh, you'll get something in writing," she said. "Count on it." She turned and marched out. Patricia let out a breath. "She's unhinged." "Probably," I agreed. "Richard, can we talk?" In his office, Richard pulled up his notes. I did some more digging into Candace's background. She had similar issues in her previous town, filed multiple complaints against neighbors, got into disputes with the local government, and was eventually asked to resign from a volunteer position on the planning board. Why did she move here? Sold her house after a contentious divorce. Millbrook probably seemed like a fresh start. Richard tapped his pen on the desk. "The problem is she's bringing all her old patterns with her, and now she's targeting you specifically. What are my options? For now, keep documenting everything. If she actually files a lawsuit, we'll deal with it. Most likely, it'll get dismissed quickly because she has no legitimate claim, but it could be annoying in the meantime." 2 weeks passed without incident. The HOA held their special meeting and voted to rescind the invalid bylaw amendments, rolled back the fee increase, and elected George Thornton as interim president. Things seemed to be returning to normal. Then, on a Saturday morning, I was working on my drainage project again when a pickup truck pulled up. A man in his 40s got out and walked over. "Quincy Xavier?" he asked. "That's me. I'm Tim Hudson. I'm a contractor hired by Candace Edmonds. She asked me to clear some trees on her property, but when I went to check the site, I noticed something odd." He pulled out his phone and showed me photos. These trees weren't knocked down by the storm. They were cut intentionally. I looked at the photos. He was right. The cuts were clean chainsaw work, not storm damage. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because she told me you refused to clear storm damage and tried to make it sound like you were being unreasonable. But this isn't storm damage. She cut these trees down herself or had someone do it." Tim shook his head. "I don't want to be part of whatever game she's playing. I thought you should know." "I appreciate that," I said. "Do you mind sending me those photos?" "Already did. I sent them to the town building department too." "If she cut down trees without a permit, that's a violation, right?" "It could be, depending on the size and location." I thought about this new development. "Thanks for letting me know." After Tim left, I called Richard. "We might have a bigger problem than I thought." Monday morning, I reviewed the photos Tim had sent with the town's building inspector, Grace Martinez. She studied them carefully. "Those are definitely deliberate cuts," Grace said. And based on the size of these trees, she needed a permit. Oak trees over 12 inches in diameter require town approval before removal. What's the penalty for unpermitted tree removal? Depends on the circumstances. Could be a fine, could require remediation, could be both. Grace pulled up the property records. When was the storm she claimed caused this damage? About 3 weeks ago. The one that came through on that Wednesday night. Grace checked her weather records. We had high winds but no reported tree damage anywhere in town. Certainly nothing that would have taken down 3 large oaks. She looked at me seriously. Quincy, I think she fabricated the storm damage story. Maybe she wanted the trees gone for her garden project and figured she'd get you to do it for free, then claim it was storm-related. That's fraud. It could be. At minimum, it's an unpermitted tree removal. I need to do a site inspection. Grace grabbed her field notebook. "Wanna come with?" We drove to 445 Meadowbrook Lane. Candace's BMW was in the driveway, and she answered the door when Grace knocked. "Mrs. Edmonds, I'm Grace Martinez, Town Building Inspector. I need to inspect the tree removal on your property." "There's nothing to inspect. Storm damage isn't subject to permits." "That's true, but I've received information suggesting this wasn't storm damage. May I see the trees?" Candace's expression went cold. "Not without a warrant." "I don't need a warrant for an exterior inspection, madam. I can see most of the property from the street and neighboring yards." Grace was already walking around the side of the house. Candace followed, protesting loudly with me trailing behind. In the backyard, the 3 oak trees lay where they had fallen, their trunks showing obvious chainsaw cuts. Grace took photos and measurements. "Mrs. Edmonds, when were these trees cut?" "They fell during the storm 3 weeks ago." "The cuts are fresh, probably within the last week." "And they're clearly chainsaw cuts, not storm damage." Grace made notes. "Did you have a permit for this removal?" "I don't need a permit for storm damage." "But this isn't storm damage. Who cut these trees?" Candace crossed her arms. "I want you both off my property." "I'll be issuing a violation notice," Grace said calmly. "You'll have the right to appeal. But based on what I see, you removed 3 protected trees without authorization. The fine is $500 per tree, plus you'll need to submit a remediation plan." We left with Candace shouting threats behind us. In the truck, Grace shook her head. "That woman is something else. She really thought she'd get away with this." "I think she's used to getting away with things," I said. "This time she pushed too far." The violation notices went out Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, Candace was back at Town Hall, demanding to see me. "This is harassment," she said when I met her in the lobby. "Pure and simple harassment because I dared to enforce HOA rules." "This has nothing to do with the HOA," I said. "You removed trees without a permit. That's a violation regardless of who you are. Those trees were storm damaged. The building inspector's report says otherwise, and we have photos from 3 different sources showing clean chainsaw cuts." I kept my voice level. "Mrs. Edmonds, you can appeal the violation through the proper channels, but yelling in the lobby won't change the facts." "I'll sue this town into bankruptcy," she hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I think I do." I held her gaze. "You need to leave now." She stormed out and I returned to my office feeling exhausted. This situation had spiraled far beyond anything I'd anticipated. Wednesday evening, I got a call from Officer Mike Stevens. "Quincy, I'm at your house. You need to get here." "What happened?" "Just get here." I drove home to find 2 police cars in my driveway and Mike examining my loader. The right side panel was badly scratched, and someone had spray painted obscenities across the cab. "When did this happen?" I asked. "Sometime between noon and now, based on your neighbor's statements." Nobody saw anything, but one woman heard spray painting sounds around 2 p.m. Mike took photos. This is vandalism, obviously. We'll process it, but without witnesses or cameras, it's going to be hard to prove who did it. I can tell you who did it, I said. Candace Edmonds. Mike sighed. I figured, but we need evidence. Does she have access to your property? No, but anyone could walk up during the day. I was at work. Mike finished his documentation and promised to file a report. After he left, I stood looking at my damaged loader, feeling a mix of anger and frustration. This had gone from annoying to criminal. Thursday morning, I met with Richard and explained what had happened. We need to take legal action, Richard said. She's crossed a line. Vandalism is a crime, and even if we can't prove it was her specifically, the pattern of behavior is clear. What can we do? File for a restraining order, for one thing. The court can consider the pattern of harassment even without proof of this specific incident, and we should refer the tree-cutting issue to the district attorney. If she filed a false storm damage claim with her insurance company, that's insurance fraud. Did she file a claim? I don't know, but I'd bet money on it. People don't go through elaborate stories about storm damage unless they're trying to get something out of it. Richard made notes. I'll contact the DA's office and explain the situation. In the meantime, install cameras on your property. I spent Friday afternoon installing a comprehensive security system around my house and garage. 6 cameras covering every approach, motion-activated lights and cloud storage for all footage. It was more than I wanted to spend, but I needed protection. Saturday morning, I was reviewing the camera feeds on my phone when I caught movement. Candace's BMW drove slowly past my house, paused for a moment, then continued down the street. She came back 20 minutes later, driving even slower, clearly checking out my property. I downloaded the footage and sent it to Mike Stevens. He called me back within an hour. That's concerning behavior, but not quite stalking under the legal definition. However, combined with everything else, it strengthens the case for a restraining order. How's that paperwork coming? Richard is filing Monday. Good. In the meantime, call us immediately if she shows up on your property or approaches you directly. Monday morning, Richard filed a petition for an order of protection against Candace. The court scheduled a hearing for the following week. That afternoon, the district attorney's office called me. Mr. Xavier, this is Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh. I've been reviewing the information your town attorney sent over about Candace Edmonds. Can you come in to make a formal statement? I met with Jennifer Tuesday morning. She was a sharp woman in her 30s with a reputation for thorough prosecutions. Walk me through everything, she said. Start from the beginning. I spent an hour detailing every interaction, every threat, every escalation. Jennifer took extensive notes and reviewed all the documentation I'd brought. Here's what I see, she said when I finished. Clear pattern of harassment, multiple witnesses, documented violations of town ordinances, evidence of filing false reports and vandalism. The tree-cutting situation is particularly interesting. Grace thinks it might be insurance fraud, I said. I'm already looking into that. I contacted her insurance company this morning. She did file a claim for storm damage, and they paid out $3,200. Jennifer's expression was grim. That's felony insurance fraud if we can prove the damage was intentional. Tim Hudson, the contractor, has photos showing the chainsaw cuts. I'm meeting with him this afternoon. If his testimony supports what you've told me, I'll have enough to bring charges. Jennifer closed her notepad. Mr. Xavier, I want you to understand that if we prosecute, this could get ugly. She'll probably claim this is retaliation for her HOA activities. It's not. This is about her criminal behavior. I know that and we can prove it, but she'll still make the accusation. Are you prepared for that? I thought about it for a moment. Yes, someone needs to stop her before she hurts someone else. The restraining order hearing was Thursday afternoon. I sat in the courtroom with Richard while Candace sat across the aisle with a lawyer she'd hired, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit named Arnold Fletcher. Judge Sarah Morrison, no relation to Richard, reviewed the petition and supporting documents. Then she asked me to testify. I walked through the timeline again. The loader incident, the tree situation, the escalating confrontations, the vandalism, the drive-bys. Richard submitted photos, police reports, witness statements, and camera footage. Then Arnold Fletcher cross-examined me. Mr. Xavier, isn't it true that you're the town supervisor of Millbrook? Yes. And isn't it true that you used your position to target my client after she asked you to perform community service? No. I responded to her demands as a private citizen. The town's involvement came later and was based on violations of law that had nothing to do with me personally. But you admit you were aware of your client's HOA activities when the town began investigating her. I was aware she was HOA president, yes, but I didn't direct any investigation. The town attorney acted independently based on resident complaints. Fletcher tried several more angles, but Richard objected to most of his questions, and the judge sustained the objections. Finally, Candace took the stand. Miss Edmonds, Fletcher said, can you explain your relationship with Mr. Xavier? He's been harassing me since I moved to Millbrook, she said. I asked him to help with some storm cleanup, and he refused, even though he had the equipment right there. Then he used his position to attack the HOA I was leading. When I tried to hold him accountable, he started filing false complaints against me. What about the vandalism allegation? I have no idea what happened to his equipment. I've never been to his property except to speak with him publicly. She looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, this man is abusing his power as town supervisor to punish me for doing my job as HOA president. He's made my life miserable for weeks, and now he wants a restraining order to silence me completely. It was a good performance, I had to admit. She sounded reasonable and wronged, but Richard was ready for his cross-examination. Miss Edmonds, did you cut down 3 oak trees on your property? They fell during a storm. That's not what I asked. Did you or someone you hired cut down 3 oak trees? She hesitated. The trees needed to come down after the storm damaged them. So you did have them cut down. Did you apply for a permit? I didn't need a permit. They were damaged. The town building inspector found no evidence of storm damage, only clean chainsaw cuts. Were you aware that trees over 12 inches in diameter require removal permits? I was told I didn't need a permit for storm damage. Did you file an insurance claim for this alleged storm damage? Her lawyer objected, but the judge overruled it. Answer the question, Miss Edmonds. Yes, I filed a claim. And did you receive payment from that claim? I don't see how that's relevant. Your Honor, it's relevant to establishing a pattern of deceptive behavior, Richard said. The judge nodded. Answer the question. Yes, I received payment. How much? I don't recall exactly. Richard pulled out a document. Your insurance company records show they paid you $3,200 for storm damage to trees. But there was no storm damage, was there? You had the trees removed deliberately and lied about the cause to defraud your insurance company. I did no such thing. Then explain why 3 independent witnesses, including a professional contractor, have stated that the damage was clearly from intentional cutting, not storm damage. Candace's face turned red. Her lawyer objected again, but the damage was done. The judge called a recess. When we reconvened, Judge Morrison delivered her decision. I've reviewed all the evidence and testimony. Mr. Xavier has presented a clear pattern of escalating harassment, including multiple documented incidents, witness statements, and physical evidence. Miss Edmonds' testimony was not credible, particularly regarding the tree removal situation. The judge looked at Candace. I'm granting a temporary order of protection. Miss Edmonds, you are to stay at least 100 yards away from Mr. Xavier, his home, his workplace, and his property. No direct or indirect contact. Violation will result in immediate arrest. We'll schedule a full hearing in 30 days to determine if this should become a permanent order. Candace started to protest, but her lawyer put a hand on her arm and whispered urgently. She sat back, glaring at me. As we left the courtroom, Richard smiled. That went well. She's not going to let this go, I said. No, probably not. But now she'll face consequences if she violates the order. Friday afternoon, Jennifer Walsh called me. We're moving forward with charges. Insurance fraud, filing a false police report for the vandalism accusation, and criminal mischief. Can you come in Monday to sign the formal complaint? What about proof she committed the vandalism? We found paint that matches the spray paint on your loader in her garage. She tried to hide it, but my investigators were thorough. Combined with her pattern of behavior and the restraining order hearing testimony, we have a strong case. I felt a mix of relief and concern. What happens now? We'll issue an arrest warrant. Given the circumstances, I'll arrange for her to surrender voluntarily rather than having officers show up at her house. Less dramatic that way. She'll be arraigned, probably released on bail, and then we go through the trial process. Monday morning, I signed the complaint. Tuesday afternoon, Candace surrendered herself to the police and was arraigned on 3 felony counts: insurance fraud, filing a false instrument, and criminal mischief. Bail was set at $10,000, which she posted immediately. The local newspaper picked up the story. The headline read, "Former HOA President Charged with Fraud, Harassment." The article detailed the charges and included background about the HOA disputes. My name was mentioned, but mostly in the context of being the target of harassment rather than as town supervisor. Wednesday morning, my phone started ringing with calls from neighbors and community members. Most were supportive, thanking me for standing up to Candace and expressing relief that she was being held accountable. A few were more cautious, worried about the town getting negative publicity. I called an informal meeting with the town board that evening to brief them on the situation. I want to be transparent about this, I told them. Everything I did was as a private citizen initially. When town matters became involved, I was careful to act appropriately and within my authority. The district attorney's investigation is independent of my position. Council member Robert Hanson nodded. We trust you, Quincy. And frankly, someone needed to deal with her. We've all heard the complaints from Hollow Creek residents. Still, Council member Lisa Torres said, we should probably have a formal statement prepared in case the media asks questions. Something that makes it clear this wasn't about your position, but about enforcing the law equally for everyone. We worked with the town's public relations consultant to draft a statement. It went out Thursday morning, and to my relief, the media attention died down quickly. Apparently, an HOA president committing insurance fraud wasn't that unusual a story. The weeks that followed were surprisingly quiet. Candace stayed away, complying with the restraining order. The HOA, now under George's leadership again, began repairing relationships with residents and working through the backlog of legitimate concerns. My loader got repaired, and I finished my drainage project. The preliminary hearing for Candace's criminal case was in early June. I attended as a witness. Her lawyer tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing insufficient evidence, but the judge found probable cause for all 3 counts and scheduled a trial for August. The permanent restraining order hearing was in July. Candace had violated the temporary order twice, once by sending a message through a third party and once by driving past my house again. Both violations were documented, and the judge wasn't pleased. Miss Edmonds, you were explicitly ordered to stay away from Mr. Xavier and his property, Judge Morrison said. These violations show a blatant disregard for the court's authority. I'm making this order permanent. 2 years with the possibility of extension if needed. Additionally, I'm finding you in contempt of court for the violations. 30 days in county jail, suspended on condition that you complete a harassment prevention program and comply fully with the order. Candace looked stunned. Her lawyer tried to argue, but the judge had made up her mind. In August, the criminal trial began. I testified on the second day, walking the jury through everything that had happened. Tim Hudson testified about the tree cuts. Grace Martinez testified about the unpermitted removal. An investigator from the insurance company testified about the fraudulent claim. The paint evidence was introduced, along with my security camera footage. The defense tried to paint me as a vindictive official using my power to persecute an innocent woman, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Sentencing was in September. The judge gave Candace 2 years in prison for the insurance fraud, with all but 6 months suspended, plus 3 years of probation. She also had to pay full restitution to the insurance company, pay for the damage to my loader, and cover court costs. As the bailiff led her away, she turned and looked at me one last time. There was no anger in her expression now, just defeat. Outside the courthouse, Jennifer Walsh shook my hand. "Justice served." "I suppose so," I said. "I just wish it hadn't gone this far. People like her always go too far. At least now she can't hurt anyone else for a while." I drove back to Millbrook feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief that it was over, satisfaction that the legal system had worked, but also sadness that someone had destroyed their life over such petty grievances. That evening, I worked in my yard, using the loader to spread topsoil over the areas I had regraded. The machine's engine rumbled smoothly, the hydraulics responding perfectly to my commands. In the distance, I could see neighbors walking their dogs, kids riding bikes, normal suburban life continuing. George Thornton walked over from across the street. "Heard about the sentencing," he said. "How are you doing?" "I'm all right. Mostly just glad it's done." "The neighborhood's glad too. We had our first HOA meeting without drama last week. Actually discussed normal stuff like pool maintenance and landscaping schedules." He smiled. "It was almost boring." "Boring sounds pretty good right now. Listen, I wanted to thank you properly. You could have just moved when she started causing trouble. Plenty of people would have. But you stood your ground and held her accountable. That took courage." "I just didn't want to let a bully win," I said. "Well, she didn't win, and this neighborhood is better for it." George looked around. "You know, the town's lucky to have you as supervisor, someone who actually understands what residents deal with and isn't afraid to do what's right." After he left, I continued working until the sun set. As I was putting the loader away, my phone buzzed with a message from Patricia. "Council meeting tomorrow night. Budget review and that zoning variance discussion. Should be straightforward." I smiled. Straightforward sounded perfect. The next morning, I put on my suit and tie and drove to Town Hall for my regular Tuesday office hours. Residents came in with the usual concerns. Pothole on Maple Street, question about a building permit, Request for a new stop sign at a busy intersection. Normal stuff. Manageable stuff. At lunch, I sat in my office reviewing documents when Richard knocked on my door. "Got some interesting news," he said. "Candace's lawyer filed an appeal." Of course he did. "Don't worry, it's a long shot at best." The trial was by the book, the evidence was solid, and the sentence was actually on the lenient side. Richard sat down. "But I thought you should know." "How long will the appeal take?" "Months, probably." "But she'll have to serve her sentence while it's pending unless she posts a bond, which I doubt she can afford at this point." He pulled out a folder. "On a more positive note, I've been working with the Hollow Creek HOA on revising their bylaws properly. George asked me to review them before they submit them for a vote. Everything's clean this time." "That's good to hear." They also voted to officially apologize to all residents who received invalid violation notices under Candace's leadership and refund any fees that were collected. It's a fresh start for them. Over the following months, life returned to normal. I continued my work as town supervisor, handling the endless stream of municipal business that kept Millbrook running. I also continued my weekend landscaping projects, finding peace in the physical work and the satisfaction of transforming raw earth into something useful. The appeal was denied in December, and Candace began serving her sentence at the county jail. I didn't follow her case closely after that. As far as I was concerned, that chapter was closed. In January, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up. A woman in her 30s got out looking uncertain. "Mr. Xavier?" she asked. "That's me." "I'm Sarah Edmonds, Candace's daughter." She held up her hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to apologize for what my mother did." I set down the wrench I was holding. "You don't need to apologize for her actions." "Maybe not, but I feel like someone from the family should acknowledge how wrong she was. I've been reading through the court records and talking to her lawyer. What she did to you was terrible." Sarah looked embarrassed. "She's always been difficult, but I had no idea she'd taken it this far. The divorce really messed her up, and I think moving here she wanted to feel in control of something. The HOA became an obsession." "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I hope she gets the help she needs. She's starting therapy in jail. The judge made it part of her sentence." "Maybe it'll help." Sarah handed me an envelope. "This is the restitution check for your loader repairs. She wanted to make sure you got it directly." "Thank you." After she left, I opened the envelope. Inside was a check for the full repair costs, along with a brief note in Candace's handwriting. "I'm sorry for everything." It wasn't much, but it was something. Maybe she was starting to understand the consequences of her actions, or maybe she was just trying to look good for the parole board. Either way, it was done. That spring, the Hollow Creek HOA held elections for their board. George chose not to run for president again, saying he'd done his duty getting things back on track. A younger couple, newcomers to the neighborhood who seemed level-headed and reasonable, were elected as president and vice president. The new board's first action was to reduce annual fees by 20% and eliminate half the regulations Candace had implemented. Bernard, the older gentleman who had stood up to Candace at that first contentious meeting, was elected to the board as well. He stopped by one Saturday while I was working. "Wanted to give you an update," he said. "The new board is working great. We're actually focused on maintaining property values and community improvements instead of hassling people over trivial violations." "Glad to hear it. Also wanted to invite you to our summer barbecue. First Saturday in June. The HOA is hosting, but it's for all residents, no pressure, no drama. Just neighbors getting together." He smiled. "You've earned some peaceful neighborhood gatherings." I attended the barbecue, bringing potato salad and staying for a couple of hours. It was nice, seeing neighbors interact without tension, kids playing, people actually enjoying each other's company. This was what an HOA was supposed to facilitate, not the toxic environment Candace had created. As I was leaving, George pulled me aside. "See, this is what it should be like." "It's good to see," I agreed. "You know what I learned from all this?" George said. HOAs work when the people running them remember they're servants of the community, not rulers of it. Candace forgot that, or maybe she never knew it. But either way, she turned something meant to help into something harmful. I thought about that on my drive home. It was a lesson that applied beyond HOAs. Any position of authority could be abused if the person holding it lost sight of why that authority existed in the first place. As town supervisor, I tried to remember that I was there to serve Millbrook's residents, not to wield power over them. By summer, Candace was released from jail to serve the remainder of her sentence under house arrest and probation. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had sold her house and moved out of state to live with family. I hoped she found peace somewhere else and learned from her mistakes. The following year brought new challenges for the town. A developer wanted to build a large apartment complex on the edge of Millbrook, sparking heated debates about growth and character preservation. The water treatment plant needed upgrades that would cost millions. A severe winter damaged roads across town, straining our maintenance budget. But these were normal challenges, the kind that came with running a small town. They required patience, negotiation, and compromise, but they were manageable. And through it all, I kept my weekends free for landscaping work, finding balance between my public responsibilities and private peace. One Saturday morning in October, I was clearing brush from my back property line when I heard a familiar sound. Someone was operating heavy machinery nearby. I walked around to the front of my house and saw a construction crew working on a new house going up 3 lots down. The operator of their excavator noticed me watching and waved. I waved back, then returned to my work. Just another day in the neighborhood. That evening, sitting on my porch with a beer, watching the sun set behind the trees, I reflected on everything that had happened. The confrontation with Candace had been exhausting and frustrating, but it had also reminded me why I'd gotten into public service in the first place. Not for power or recognition, but to help ensure that rules were fair and applied equally, that people's rights were protected, and that communities functioned properly. Would I have done anything differently? Maybe I could have tried harder to de-escalate things earlier, though I wasn't sure anything would have stopped Candace once she decided I was her enemy. Maybe I should have revealed my position as town supervisor sooner, though that might have made her accusations of bias more credible. In the end, though, the system worked. The law was applied fairly, justice was served, and the community recovered. Sometimes that was the best you could hope for. My phone buzzed with a message from Patricia. "Early meeting Monday, FYI. County executive wants to discuss the regional water project." I sent back a quick acknowledgement and finished my beer. Monday would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new people to help. But tonight, I was just a guy sitting on his porch, enjoying the peace and quiet of a Saturday evening in Millbrook, New York. The loader sat in my garage, clean and ready for the next project. The drainage work I'd started all those months ago, before Candace had ever demanded I clear her property, was finally complete. Water flowed properly across my land now, preventing erosion and pooling. It had taken longer than expected, delayed by criminal trials and restraining orders, but it was done. Sometimes, the simplest projects became complicated through circumstances beyond your control. But if you stayed focused on doing things right, on following proper procedures, on treating people fairly even when they didn't extend the same courtesy to you. Things usually worked out in the end. I went inside as darkness fell, already thinking about next weekend's project. I had been eyeing a spot near the fence that would be perfect for a small pond. Nothing fancy, just something to attract wildlife and add some interest to the yard. It would take careful grading, a liner, some rocks for the edges. A good project for my loader. And this time, I thought with a slight smile, I'd finish it without any HOA drama.